welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapist, a podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys, how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. Solo episode today because I didn't want to put anyone through what I wanted to talk about. My brain, in trying to make sense of the crazy times we're living through. I'm ADHD, so on the spectrum, and I have ADHD. And the rabbit hole my brain has been going down is trying to make sense of not really how we got here, because that's not baffling. Lots of people who are smarter than me and more knowledgeable on that topic have talked at length about that topic. But why it's so dumb is really a thing that my brain struggles with. How did we get here where it's so normal to be so dumb? And, great quotes from people, Asimov, Asimov, Carl Sagan. People have talked about when thoughts and ideas, when people's feelings become more important than provable facts. Lots of smart people have commented on society's downfall when it gets too stupid. And here we are, but one of the things my brain really struggles with is the principle that something is wrong, not morally wrong, but factually incorrect. And then it is allowed to be, really bothers me. I've gone to therapy about it. I have a whole meditation that my therapist made me do. And, I know how to live with it. But that autistic part of my brain that is very firm on a rule hates that, no, it's incorrect, therefore we need to correct it before we can move on. And then the ADHD part of my brain, which is let's read all of the information about this. So I have been reading the history of Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. We've dropped that bit to sort of get where we're at. And I work with religious trauma. So, when working with spaces around religion, it's made up. So trying to find factual information is really hard, and sort of landing on it's dumb because it's made up is sort of okay. Working in decolonizing spaces and working with racism and bigotry, it's dumb, it's stupid, it's our brain misfiring on implicit biases and then systemic structures making that okay. And it's stupid. You're never going to find the logic in it. There isn't logic in it, and it's dumb. And so I sort of know all of this, and yet have been making my dear, dear local librarians work hard to go to the archives and pull books that nobody's read since 1980, because I want to read weird little nuanced information about cult behavior in the 80s and white supremacy and the Klan and neo-Nazis, and where Christianity sort of conflates with all of that. And it, in a way, gives me some comfort knowing we've done this before and it went poorly. And, we're all still here. We didn't nuke ourselves out of existence. And, it's still really dumb and upsetting, and people are going to get hurt because it's not being done out of a place of altruism. So that sort of brings me to the second Trump presidency, in which he continues to golf and waste taxpayer money while pretending he's going to save us money. Again, the guy who famously bankrupted a casino, probably because that was a front for a money laundering operation from foreign countries. Again, he's a Russian asset. So these things make sense when we sort of keep that in mind, big picture. It's really hard to stay on topic when you're being why are things so dumb when everything's so dumb? Idiocracy was way ahead of its time, even down to us all wearing Crocs. All right, so if Trump's just golfing more days than not, I don't know that it's more days than not, but it's multiple days a week, laziest president of all time, and wasting taxpayer money, funneling it to his own golf course and making Secret Service, waste taxpayer dollars instead of going to Camp David and golfing on the golf course that the government already owned. Then who's doing the executive orders? Well, obviously they're written A by like AI and people who aren't very good at grammar, and B, the Heritage Foundation, who also is not very good at much of anything other than being bigots. So the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank. I think that's generous. Again, understanding that like think tanks as political movements are just sort of like people who are paid to write shit and not paid for thinking. These are not uh, the creme de la creme, cream of the crop academics. These are sellouts in the same way that the right wing media is all sellouts, right? Ben Shapiro is a failed screenwriter. He wanted to be famous in Hollywood, couldn't get there. Right wing grift. Candace Owens, failed actress. Right wing grift. Russell Brand, somewhat successful comedian, started sexually assaulting people, was going to get caught up in that. Right wing grift. Jordan Peterson, failed academic. Right wing grift. Right? Like, I don't know. There's a whole piece of that. But the Heritage Foundation, they've been around for a while since the Reagan administration, since before the Reagan administration, and they've been doing sort of justifications for things, trying to get the levers of power to turn it into a Christian nationalist state, it being the United States. They're Christo-fascists. They believe in a theocracy in which, yeah, Christians are in charge. And so we're going to break down just that concept. I will probably do more podcast episodes or YouTube videos or both on the idea of Christian identity, which is a loose idea that a lot of neo Nazis use, and it's the foundation. It's hard to talk about Christian nationalism without going back all the way to like where did this stuff start? And spoiler alert, I've read a bunch of books on it because that's my brain. It started in a very stupid place. Christian identity was sort of born out of this movement, late 1800s in Britain, actually, the British Israelism movement, which basically says Jewish people aren't the real Jews. The lost tribes of Judah settled in England, and therefore the Brits are the real Jews. The other Jews are imposters. And, uh, then it got weird and racist from there. I mean, started out bigoted, like they just wanted to take away credit from the Jews and make themselves special. But this maps really well with American exceptionalism in the idea that Christian nationalism sort of needs a background to say, like, we're God's chosen people. Because otherwise, like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Which again, I can't say this enough. It doesn't make any sense. The hypocrisy in all of this is going to be maddening. And if you think dealing with right wingers, either on the political or religious spectrum, pointing out their hypocrisy is going to change them, it's not. The hypocrisy is baked in. They don't care. But so this idea that people who can trace their actual genealogy are not actually the correct biblical Jews, God's chosen people, but actually imposters. And actually, it's Britain. Nope, JK. It's actually America that's God's chosen people. Sort of tracks where a lot of this bigotry comes from. And again, like the early run at Christian nationalism, America had a Christian nationalist party, the Christian Nationalist Crusade. They had a guy run for president in 1948. They tried to have MacArthur run for president in 1952, but he was like, "You're not going after communists. You're just going after Jews. I got more bigotry than just that." So, they had two failed presidential runs. But it was born out of this idea at a time when we didn't have DNA testing. This is factually incorrect and also easy to disprove. Like some guy just got access to a printing press and wrote about it, and here we go. And like some guys, right? There were 3 or 4 of them, but like they just were prolific with printing out pamphlets and handing them out. And in the way that other cults grow up, they just sort of like found people who had moved recently to California or were otherwise like displeased about things or homeless or whatever. And they're like, come join us. And that's sort of the extremist side of things. I'm losing track. I'm doing the history bit without giving you the important figures. But I'm just letting you know they're dumb. You can read lots of books on it. Yeah, there's lots of books on it. I'll do a different series on that. when I have all my books in front of me. I have one with me, several with me. Religion and the Racist Right: The Origins of the Christian Identity Movement by Michael Barkun. Uh, great one. Read that. Your local library will have to go to the archive for it. No one's checked it out recently, unless you're in the Midwest, in Milwaukee public library system. Then I have it checked out still. Sorry. Uh, so this iteration of Trump and what the Heritage Foundation does is directly tied to white supremacy, right? Like it's a direct timeline. Like it's not a new thing. MAGA isn't new. That's even a Reagan slogan. Make America Great Again. He didn't use it as a slogan. It's from one of his speeches. But it's this idea that like America used to be awesome, and we're going to go back to that. When was America awesome? Well, when it was more Christian. Well, when it was more Christian was post-war, when they added things like one nation under God to the flag, and in God we trust to the American dollar. Like these were just political movements and racist, right? Because the religious right was mad they didn't have any political power, and the political right was mad about desegregation, and the religious right was like, hey, we're mad about that too. Descendants of Esau shouldn't be with us. The descendants of Esau thing's the whole thing. Descendants of Ham, the curse of Ham, because God genocided the world a couple times and then cursed one of Noah's kids for not stopping him from getting drunk and sleeping with his daughters. This is the whole thing in the Bible. Again, let's read it to all our children in public school in their classrooms. Couple of genocides, lots of incest. These things happen in scriptural documents. So Christian nationalism is white supremacy, right? Like the Christian Nationalist Crusade was run by white supremacists. Christian identity is about that. Not only is America God's chosen people, because the Jews have been lying, the actual Jewish people who have that genealogy in their DNA. Well, actually, in Christian identity belief, they're the offspring of Satan and not God's chosen people. The lost tribes are God's chosen people, and that was the British settlers who then came to America because, like, religious zealots, right? So you sort of have to track like this stupidity for a while to get to where we are today. And today's Christian nationalist movement doesn't get into doctrine because like it's really bad, right? Like it sounds bad to say those groups of people who openly identify as Jewish have been lying to you. They're actually the offspring of Satan. We are God's chosen people. They've just not taken that stance and dumbed it down to like America's Christian, because David Barton, a failed historian who's not a historian at all, but tries to write fictional historical fiction books that make it seem like America was settled on Christian principles, but it wasn't. We have one historian who's not a real historian saying this, so it is. And like again, if you're like, well, that doesn't make sense, you have to understand like there's this whole backing from white supremacy throughout America's history in the rise of the KKK and desegregation, Brown v. versus Board of Education, when the religious right and the political right were like, let's work together because we don't want kids who don't look like our kids in our kids' schools, which is racism, right? So that's sort of where Christian nationalism comes from. And that's the part they don't want to talk about, right? So like, I didn't see anything ever in the run up for either of Trump's presidential runs on the Christian Nationalist Crusade has already been done. Like that's a political party that existed in America's history. Like that's not hard to prove. Like just Wikipedia that. Like Google that. Wikipedia will come up. It'll tell you about it. It's a whole thing. Campus Crusades for Christ, which is still like an active group that on any college campus, like they gave a bunch of money and land to a white supremacist who built a compound, and then they robbed a bunch of banks. Elohim City, for those of you who want to, like, it's a whole thing, right? This very fun little rabbit hole to go down when you're ex-evangelical. So, right, they've dumbed it all down. The religious right, the political right, has been fighting American education for a long time. 48%, probably a low estimate now, of Americans can't read above a sixth grade level. Doesn't mean they're stupid. It means they've not been well educated. And what reading below a sixth grade level, sort of that cutoff is like complex thoughts, complex sentences, hard for your brain to stick with it. So lock her up. Great slogan. We can chant it like we're at a wrestling venue, and it's easy to remember. And it has this simple idea of right versus wrong, right? Um, Ignore the idea that the convicted felon is the one chanting it, right? Again, this is not about not being hypocritical. This is about dumbing down the idea. So, Christian nationalism, we have this long history of white supremacy. We have this long history of neo Nazis using Christianity because Christianity is incredibly malleable to authoritarian states, because Christianity is authoritarian at its core. There is authority in God. God can take away your rights, your autonomy. He can control you, but you cannot control him. Therefore, it is authoritarian at its base. And there needs to be a power imbalance if you're selling a savior, right? Like, you need to be bad and broken if you're going to buy into this idea of needing to be saved. So, yeah, Christian nationalism as today is really dumbed down, but that's its heritage, right? Like, even the Heritage Foundation, right? Its heritage is white supremacy. That's where it's coming from. That's where the thinkers are coming from. That's where this baked in ideas are coming from. They're just not getting into the doctrine of it because it sounds bad. It sounded bad in 1948 when America was far more racist than it is today. And, that's not great. So they dumbed it down. So Christian nationalism, which is pro-America and pro-Christianity, we're going to put those together and then we'll be great again, is the idea, right? Like, point A to point B. Let's keep in mind, not above a sixth grade reading level. Doesn't mean we're dumb, means we're uneducated. We don't do complex thoughts. We can't carry too many things in our brain at one time. So, do you like Jesus? Yes. Do you like America? Yes. We're for you. Except at its core, Christian nationalism isn't accurate. It is neither Christian nor nationalism. Christianity, they will say Judeo-Christian values, they being like the right-wing grifters I named earlier. That's a made-up concept. Judeo-Christian values, that doesn't mean anything. And they never want to define it because it doesn't mean anything. Because Judaism and Christianity are two different religions. They share about 5 books of the Bible, and not the important ones. All right, sorry, that might be offensive to Judaism. I don't care about offending religions. So who cares? It's made up and factually inaccurate. That's probably more offensive. Yeah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament is sort of the overlap, and then ignoring things moving forward, because Judaism is a long history of important religious leaders reading things and interpreting them and understanding them in a way that informs their current belief system that Christianity ignores, and then Judaism ignores, like the New Testament, which Christianity makes a pretty big deal out of. So, Judeo-Christian doesn't mean anything. So it's not Christian, but in those original 5 books where there's some overlap, if we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, which we shouldn't, but I'm just making a point, Judeo-Christian values are going to be coming from the first 5 books of the Bible. So let's say the 10 Commandments, right? Because that's in the Old Testament still. So, like, okay, Book of Exodus, first 5 books of the Bible. We got a couple genocides. The world's been populated by incest twice now, and God's cool with that, right? Like, clearly. Also cool with slavery. That's in these first 5 books of the Bible. As long as you, don't. If you beat your slave, that's okay, unless they die within 3 days, and then that's bad, and you should pay some money. But, like, otherwise, it's okay. Again, slavery is okay. Just don't beat your slaves so badly that that's killing them. Old Testament. Woo! Again, let's read this stuff to children in public schools with taxpayer money. An actual Christian nationalist stance, right? It's happening in Oklahoma right now, and other states, but Oklahoma's the one that's closest to getting it through. So the Old Testament, right? 10 Commandments. Where are we going here? 10 Commandments. One of the big ones, you shall have no other gods, right? That's the first commandment, right? No other gods. So there's a really good book called God and Anatomy by Francesca I forget her last name. There's a lot of consonants put together. I'll have it in the show notes. God and Anatomy, which looks at where Judaism sort of grew out of in the Middle East and what other religions were doing then. And early Israelites were almost assuredly polytheists, which is why there's so much stuff about other gods. And this God being the only God for the Israelites, not that there weren't other gods, that you were not supposed to worship them. And so, yeah, read that book. It's fascinating and also a lot of fun because, like, in that day and age, there was a bit of tongue in cheek, wink, wink, nudge, nudge innuendo about people's feet, and so there's lots of things in the Old Testament about God's feet, and it's probably talking about his penis instead. So, you know, if you think it's funny that you could go to hell for great grandpa staring at someone's ankles, like the innuendo in the Old Testament is pretty top notch when you get that feet means penis. Um, a thing I learned after deconstructing. No one taught me that in my private school education, my religious upbringing. So Christianity, Old Testament, Judeo-Christian, first five books of the Bible. The Ten Commandments is what we're left with. You shall have no other gods. It goes against the idea that you're putting your country first, right? So like nationalism and Christianity don't play well together unless, for those of you who are listening, it just rewound with my hands. Unless, let's rewind, you can say that your country is chosen by God, which America wasn't. Unless, rewinding again, you can get to a point, Christian identity, that says, actually, we are God's chosen country. How fun, right? And that's, again, then you have to take all the white supremacy and you have to take the history of neo Nazis and authoritarian groups and militias, right wing militias, and all that stuff that gets us to that point. There's no divorcing that information unless you're willfully saying, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we are white supremacists. Stand back, stand by, white supremacists, instead of being like, no, we're not Nazis. Pete Hegseth, whatever job he's holding that he's terribly unqualified for, former Fox News, that's not true, Fox Entertainment, former Fox morning show guy, having to say recently that they're sending migrants to Guantanamo Bay, having to clarify this isn't the camps, referring to concentration camps from Nazi Germany. Like, you're doing something wrong if that's a clarification. I'm not like, hey, I'm signing my kid up for summer camp, not concentration camp, just sports. No one has to do that in regular conversation. The fact that you're having to clarify that is already a problem. I'm losing the plot here. What a stupid time to be like. No other gods. Okay, you can't worship a country. You certainly can't worship the country's leader as a god. And nationalism is country above everything else, right? So ultimate loyalty to your country comes first. Again, that doesn't play well with Christianity. Definitely doesn't play well with Christianity if we get into the New Testament, because Jesus is like, don't make a home here. You're not of this world. And Jesus being a mythical figure, whoever was writing in those gospels, saying that's what Jesus said. But like the mythos of Jesus is earth's not your home. Sell your possessions, leave your family, come follow me. The end is nigh. Again, he was just an apocalyptic preacher, if some version of him existed at all. So, yeah, Christian nationalism is meaningless. Now, I would tend to say, understanding its white Christian identity thinking, if we take Christianity to be like the bastardized neo-Nazi version of it, which I think it is. Again, like if we look at history, a bunch of people going back to Constantine being like, yeah, let's put Jesus' birth on the pagan winter solstice day because I'm a Christian now. Like that was just mostly for political success, and also I think to make his wife happy. And as a religious trauma therapist, yes, but also a licensed marriage and family therapist, would a leader definitely do that to keep his spouse happy? 100%, right? Like, sure, I'm Christian now. I got you. So Hitler had a whole version of Christianity that was all about the Aryan race. And again, like these neo Nazis are building on that. Positive Christianity was his brand of Christianity. We don't hear that anymore. It pretty much died with Nazi Germany. Um, Not that the Nazis didn't disperse, but it was never really a real doctrinally sound thing. It was just something he did because it was popular to be Christian. Lots of anti-Semitism uh, in baked in over there because Martin Luther, famous reformer, was really anti-Semitic by the end of his life. To a degree where the Lutheran churches that still exist should really call that out. And to my knowledge, I was raised Lutheran. Only one publicly has, like in the 90s, the ELCA, which is the most progressive of the Lutheran, which is insane a lot because it's really terrible. Um, yeah, so Christian nationalism, not nationalism, it's nativism. If you were born here, then we're with you. It doesn't want black or brown people, certainly. The idea that, like, you have to understand it's just white supremacy because, again, like, if you're saying, well, native people to America are white, like, that's obviously false. But you want to exclude black and brown people because you're racist, then you sort of have to figure out, like, how are you defining nativism? And again, like, this is no credit to neo Nazis of the past. They at least had an ethos, right? Like they had doctrine that they were pretty committed to. This branch is just like the religious right being like, Donald Trump's a grifter, but our grift is better, so we can use him. And Donald Trump being like, the religious people are grifters, but I can out con them. And like, yeah, that's where we're at. That's why everything's so dumb. It doesn't mean anything. And the words they're using are just placeholders for ideas that are so devoid of meaning that people are sort of projecting their own meaning onto it to mean something good. Like, I'm voting for this person because they're Christian nationalists and like Jesus in America, woohoo. Right. And like, again, we did this. The Christian Nationalist Crusade Party was a real political movement. We did it with Reagan, right? Like the moral majority is the spin on this. And, 40 some years later, we're still dealing with the shit that Reagan did to ruin our economy. It's going to get worse, y'all, right? Like, this isn't a hopeful podcast. This is just saying we've been here before. It did not end civilization. It did make things worse. We used to dismiss this nonsense quite handily. The neo Nazis have been trying to fight DEI for a while, bombing places. Really great podcast. Weird Little Guys does a whole bit about Dennis Mahon. May or may not have been involved in Oklahoma City. At Elohim City, I mentioned that earlier. Again, Campus Crusades for Christ gave that land to a white supremacist. I couldn't believe that when I found that. That's why I keep bringing that up, because it's so wild to me to be like, oh, I went to the University of Minnesota from 2006. In 2006, I was on a college campus, and there was crew. Like, that's still a thing, and like a very obvious connection to a white supremacy compound. Again, a thing people should go out of their way to denounce. So I don't know. I'm already at half an hour here. I'm not sure how much longer I want to get into this stuff. Um, the Christian right in the late 70s, 80s. Jerry Falwell, again, Behind the Bastards, already covered that. You're just getting my podcast recommendations. Jerry Falwell, again, just a eugenicist and a segregationist. So marrying the religious right. Liberty University was founded so it didn't have to be a segregated. So it didn't have to integrate. It wanted to be segregated. And I don't know, that's the whole push for school choice. That's the whole push for defunding the Department of Education, getting vouchers. It's funneling money. It's not just about being segregated anymore, but that's still there. But very much about funneling money to people who are already wealthy, because people who are paying for private school tuition already have enough money to do that. So you're just giving them a tax break through the tax break that's going to pass by cutting Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and giving that to rich people. It's just, I was having this conversation recently. It's very hard to understand any of this with any sort of like basic human decency. If you are at all altruistic in the sense that like you want to help people, none of this makes sense. Uh, because it's selfishness and it's greed and it's making yourself feel good by stepping on other people. And yeah, that's really terrible. Uh, so yeah, this vague idea of Christian values and that somehow being patriotic. Also, I have such a visceral reaction to this idea of patriotism um, as something that you can't complain about America, like you can't critique leadership. Obviously, huge hypocritical double standard because the religious right was very critical of Joe Biden and also felt like they were still great patriots. But if you criticize Donald Trump, you are not being patriotic. But when you care about something, you evaluate it and you are critical of it when it warrants such a thing, right? Like I'm a huge fan of Packers. I really should stop liking the NFL. It is a deeply problematic and really terrible thing, and it's just hard to be from Wisconsin and raised in that and not like the Packers. Um, like lots of criticism I have made publicly and privately of how the Packers do things, especially the Mike McCarthy years. And because I'm a fan, right? Because I am a huge fan. I support my team. I care. That's why I criticize what they're doing. And that's so again, like this idea that patriotism is like America first, nationalism. And again, I think it's more nativism, but such a like stupid, obviously racist version of nativism. Not that nativism isn't racist, just like no one's being like land back. Let's give it all back to indigenous people and the First Nations who are here, because that would actually be nativism. When the far left and the far right become that circle that sort of meet back. But that, again, because the far right is racist, they're not saying let's give land back. They're saying we colonized this first, so it's ours, and you can't come in later. I think is the idea. Um, and again, like somehow that's Christian values, which like is neither in the Old Testament or the New Testament. Definitely like mission work and colonizing behaviors have taken over modern Christianity. Um, but even if you sort of look at like Paul's work, the Apostle Paul, the standard bearer for mission work, he was sort of like an anarchist. Like he wanted to make like Christian communes. He wasn't doing it to take over the world. That really is sort of the Catholic Church. Um, and that happens from like 300 to 1500, just a little 1200 years there to try and take over the world. Did a not a bad job. Really good attempt at taking over the world if that's the only standard you look at. um, but like yeah, Paul's writing predates the Gospels. And so if we look at Paul first, like he was really trying to set up sort of like communes. Like he was aware the Romans existed. He was a Roman citizen, but he was like, "Fuck that noise. Let's do our own thing." Um, and then other people who claimed to be Paul were like, "Let's put in some strict rules on like women cover your heads up." It's a big mixed bag. Again, the Bible as any sort of basis for morality is quickly disproven when you look at how many Nazis have used the Bible, um, and still are right. Like there was Trump holding up the Bible upside down while having the National Guard shoot protesters. So like, you know, I don't have a lot of nice things to say about it. My brain is still in this rabbit hole. Again, it's just a process. I'm a verbal processor. Gonna have some episodes about neo Nazis using Christianity because Christianity is not a net good for society. It is far too malleable. It doesn't actually mean a whole lot. And therefore, bad faith actors can come in and take advantage of it. And the people who identify as Christian still, not just Christian identity, because like that is very specifically a neo-Nazi sect of Christianity, but people who still identify as modern day Christians, evangelicals, etc., don't speak out against these things. Again, that is wokeness, which means caring about marginalized communities, which uh, I would argue as an evangelical from the 90s is the thing I was taught to do. Like the parable of the Good Samaritan seems like a pretty clear cut, you should care about marginalized communities. But, I didn't also grow up listening to Rush Limbaugh or Fox News, so turned out to be liberal. Not even a liberal, just fucking leftist. Um, Man, I have so much written that I didn't get to. As close to a script for this episode as I've gotten, I think. Um, yeah, I'm gonna save that for more. We're gonna go over some memory issues, cultural selective memory, how media control plays into that, cultural anxieties at different times leading to authoritarian leaders, and why Christianity feeds on and creates cultural anxieties, why there are so many moral outrages, panics. That's the thing I've talked about before um, on the podcast, some of the satanic panic, the trans panic right now, but looking back at Satanic Panic and Pokemon and Harry Potter and all the things that I grew up with that were supposedly ending the world, let alone rock and roll. Um, yeah, yeah. There's so much here. It's interesting if you're not living through it. It's interesting if no one was being actively hurt and having to live in daily fear. So yeah, take care of your neighbors. It is a good thing for moral reasons, not religious reasons, for actual ethics, has proven that we should take care of marginalized communities. And so, if you are part of that, to participate in your community, because that's where your strength will be and your safety will be. And if you have some privilege, to use that to be beneficial for the marginalized communities. Um, Class consciousness is higher than it usually is in America right now. So again, some solidarity for your fellow marginalized folks. If you are not making over $360,000 a year, your taxes are going to go up. So again, class solidarity. Fuck Nazis. Punch them in the face. After we eat the rich, then we go after the reverend, right? That's from, gosh, what is that from? That's a good line. Um, put that in the show notes. It's from Infinity Knives. I'm just drawing a blank on it. We'll just have a bunch of stuff in the show notes that I've read a lot of recently and didn't articulate well in this 45-minute podcast. We've done this before. We'll get through it as a community, together, fight back, resist, protect marginalized communities because they are going to be hurt by all of these things. This isn't just like a catchy tagline on my way out. It's really, honestly, advice from a licensed mental health professional. Take care of yourself so you can take care of each other. Peace out, everybody. Hopefully, we'll be back with, I don't know, some fucking positivity soon. Peace.